Hey, hi friend, welcome to today's video. So today we are going to discuss a very important and a very basic question which is generally asked in all the interview that what is optional? Now, if I go by the definition, so basically an optional instruct is basically a constant or variable that can hold a value or no value. Okay, that means like if I have a normal string, it can always contain just a string. It cannot hold a nil value. But if I have an optional string, then it can have value or it can contain nil also. Now, optional was introduced from very first version of the Swift, and the main agenda of having optional is to save the program from crashing. Like it handles the cases very optimal way. Okay, so how to declare optional variable is very simple. Let's say that I can write where name colon a string and it becomes a optional variable. That means I can hold a name equals to nil. Okay, and if I run this, the program will not going to crash. Now, if let's say that the interviewer wants one more deeper level question in optional, and he can ask that what is the type of optional? What is basically optional or how optional works? Now, the answer to that question is so basically if you go to the Swift open source GitHub library, here you can see that optional is basically a enum. So if somebody asks you what is the type of optional, it's enum. And this has two cases. Case none. None basically when you are having the nil value. So it basically is handled by the case none. And some means when you are putting some value to the optional. Okay. So that's how basically the optional works. Okay. So optional is an enum with two cases. One is none and one is some. Some holds value. None means it's basically a nil. Okay. So that's the next counter question that an interviewer can ask you. Okay. Now the next question which comes generally in the optional is what is optional binding? What basically we use optional binding. So we use optional binding to get the actual value from a optional variable. Okay, so use optional binding to find out whether an optional contains a value and if so to make that value available as a temporary constant or variable. For example, let's say that if I put nilles here, okay, now what does it print? It will print optional nilles because the type of name is optional. Okay, so okay, I'm not printing it, so let's print it. So it you see it's printing optional list. Now how to get, but your agenda is not to get print optional list. You want to print the list. Not the process of getting an actual value from a optional variable, that is what we call something as optional binding. Now there are multiple ways of doing optional binding. So what are the ways? We have if late, we have guard late, then we have nil collocating operator, and we have force unwrapping. So these are four ways through which we can get the actual value out of an optional variable. Now let's see one by one each. So now the first one, let's see force unwrapping. Now how to do force unwrapping is very simple, that you put the exclamatory symbol at the end of the optional variable. Now if you print it, it will print my name Nilesh. But the problem with the force unwrapping is that if the value is nil, that means instead of Nilesh, if I put the value as nil and if I run it again, the application is crash. Okay, so force unwrapping is like you are forcing an optional variable to no to to give its actual value, but in this case there is no value, and that's why the application is crashing, and that's one of the error which you might see multiple times when you are developing your application unexpectedly found nil while unwrapping an optional value. So as per my suggestion, I suggest everyone that don't use force unwrapping unless it is you are very sure that you have the value. Okay, so that's the first approach, force unwrapping. Now the next is nil collocating operator. Now how to use nil collocating operator is you put this double question mark, give some default value to it. Let's say that I just give empty string. And now if you run this, so what it will do, it will try to internally unwrap this value, and if it finds nil, then it will assign the default value that what you are giving. See, right now I'm giving empty, so you're not seeing anything in the print. Let's give as app developer. So this time you will see that the print statement is printing app developer because name is nil. And if I give name as nil is, it will give me back the same value nil is. Now, the third is if late. If late is, you use something like if late, and then you give some variable. Let's say that I give name equals to name. Now, here I'll just write name. Now you can see here there are two names. One, you can see this is optional name, optional string, and this is normal string. So optional string is actually pointing to your actual variable, and name, this is pointing to this variable what you are creating. So either you can use the same variable or you can use some different variable name also. So now if I print it, okay, let me comment this line. So if I run this, it will print me nillis without any issue. So this is what you have if late. Many times here the question will be asked that what is the difference between if late and the guard late, which one you should use, whether you should use guard late or whether you should use if late. We'll understand this very properly inside this particular example. Okay, so let's just get rid of all this thing. So here what I have created a struct employee, I have a class test, just a function, and then here I'm just creating the object of class, calling this function to test it. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to create object of employee. Okay, so let's create employee object, and then okay, so I'm passing all the value, whether every value was optional, but I'm passing all. Okay, now here let's say that I want to call a function. Let's say that I have a function here, function, and this function accepts like city and country to form the actual address. So I'll just call this function as form address, and I'll pass here city, which is a string type, and then here we have country. So now to call this function, what you need? You need city and you need country, and both are actually string, not optional. So what you can do? One way you can write like if late city equals to, generally how as a junior developer you write it employee dot ct, and then you'll again write if late country equals to employee dot country, and then you can call the function form address and pass city and pass country. Now there is nothing wrong with this particular way how we have written it. But the problem here is that, see, if you have one more variable, what if you have one more variable? So that way you are creating a pyramid of doom. A pyramid of doom we tell when we have conditions inside conditions. And what does this do? Basically, it reduces the readability of the code. What if you have, let's say, 8 or 10 if condition inside it? It becomes very difficult to read it. So this way is not the correct way of using multiple iflet inside one uh, scenario. So what you can do, you can club your iflet. Okay, so instead of having see two if condition, what you can do, you can get rid of one if condition. Okay, so I will delete this inner if condition, and I can combine multiple late statement with a comma. So only if, and then you can write as many as late condition. So this way, if you see, I have reduced it to one if condition. Okay. Now here the questions which comes. Okay. Now let's see the another thing. What is guardlet? Now the same thing I can do with the guardlet. Now how the guardlet, the syntax will look like guardlet ct equals to employee.ct, and same thing let we have country equals to employee dot country. Now else, let me write first, I can write return, and then here I can call form address, and I can pass city, and I can pass country. Now, one difference you can see from yourself also, that inside the if let condition, the scope of these variables are local inside this if condition. See, I cannot access this city outside of this. There's no city here. So you can access this city only inside the if condition. But in the guardlet, it becomes global inside the function where you're using it. So see, I can access this city outside this guard. And that gives the guardlet more advantage over the iflet. That is one advantage. Now, many times like you the basic difference when you somebody asks you what is the difference between iflet and a guardlet, we generally say that guardlet have inbuilt return statement, like we can do early exit from the guardlet. But if you see practically, I can do the early exit in the iflet also. I can write a return statement here also. That means if this condition is not satisfied, I'll just do return here. I'll not perform any operations further. So early exit, of course, is by default in the guardlet, but it can be done using a statement using iflet also. So that difference is there, but the major difference between the guardlet and the iflet is the scope of the variable. That in the iflet, the scope of the variable is within that if condition, and in the guardlet, it is global inside the function where you are using it, and that gives you more power of better readability of the code. Let's say that in this case it looks more prettier, that okay, if I have the city, if I have the country, then I'm calling this form address. But here's, see, this call is going inside this if condition. So if I have further operation, that will also go inside the if condition. So again, here my suggestion would be that if you can use guardlet, always prefer using guardlet over the iflet. That will make your code more readable. So that's all which is generally asked from you in terms of optional binding. Now the final thing is optional chaining. Now, optional chaining basically is a process of querying and calling properties. Okay. For example, here if you see, you are calling this city, or you are calling this con company property, which is a part of your struct employee. Okay. Now, till now we have not used optional chaining anywhere. Now let's say that if I want to always pass uppercase parameter for my city and uppercase parameter for my company, regardless of whatever the value it is. Okay, so I can call, let's say, a method here dot uppercase. Now see, the moment you write uppercase, the compiler insert a question mark here. Now this is what something, a syntax of optional chaining. Now here what the compiler will do, that see, you're calling a method uppercase. Now what does uppercase method does? It is part of your string, that it will convert your string to uppercase. Now, when it will convert, when you will have a string variable, let's say that if you don't have any value, there's no meaning or there's no point of converting it to uppercase. So that's what the optional chaining will do here, that it will first check if it has the value. If it don't have the value, it will not call this method. And if it has the value, then only it is going to call this method. So this is what the concept of optional chaining is this. So optional chaining is all related with basically how you query your optional variable, and optional binding is more related with how you get your actual variable out of optional value. So that's all from today's video, and do like, comment, and subscribe the channel. I generally post some basic output based question on my community. So thanks for watching the video. Thank you.